Welcome to Caribbean Business Review, where insight meets impact. We bring you economic and financial updates, sharp statistical breakdowns, and data driven insights on the forces shaping the region. Smart analysis, bold ideas, real Caribbean intelligence. This is CBR. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the Caribbean Business Review, or as we lovingly call it, CBR. My name is Joseph Cox, and with me is
Sherry from, and I am delighted to be co-hosting CBR with you, Joseph.
It's indeed our pleasure to have you, Sherian. And as we do say, we are living in interesting times, and I'm sure you'll be raising some of those issues as we go forward. But just to point out that in our Island Insight segment this week, we'll be having a conversation with the dynamic economist, Marla Dukaran, giving us some insights into what's happening in Trinidad, as well as some of the wider Caribbean islands. Then we'll moving on to have a discussion on our strategy deep dive as we look at what's happening in our regional dysfunctional labor market. And that conversation will be led by Marjorie Straw. Now, after that, we will get into our game changer and playbook. But Cherian, I suspect that persons really want to hear some of the insights that you'll be bringing through the segments that you're covering today.
For sure, because we have the market watch and the global pulse, and we are seeing where the US is imposing a 5% excise tax on remittances out of the US, and we can understand the impact on Caribbean economies that are dependent on remittances to some extent, as well as the downgrade of the US from their AAA rating, which will impact interest rates. So quite a few things that are happening. But first, Joseph, we're going to have the CBR briefing, and I'm looking forward to hearing your insights on what's been happening this.
All right, thank you very much, Sherian. But just to point out to everybody that this segment will be rotating among all the co-hosts. So from week to week, you'll have a different perspective, and surely not just mine. So at this juncture, as we prepare to enter our CBR briefing, let me just remind you that this is CBR, and we'll be right back just after this. In the post-pandemic global economy, a fundamental truth has reasserted itself. The customer is king. But across the Caribbean, it's a crown many enterprises have forgotten to polish. As we navigate this new era defined by digital acceleration, shifting consumer habits, and hyper-personalized experiences, Caribbean businesses are being outpaced. While the rest of the world embraces omnichannel solutions to meet the evolving needs of our customers, far too many of our firms still lack even a basic digital presence. E-commerce, the very engine of modern retail, remains underutilized or misunderstood. The consequences? Lost market share, dwindling competitiveness, and an ever-widening gap between what customers expect and what businesses deliver. This isn't just a technology issue, it's a mindset issue. Customer centricity is more than a slogan or customer service metric. It's a strategic orientation that requires businesses to redesign their operations, offerings, and communication channels around the customer, not merely for them. In today's landscape, that means giving customers seamless, consistent, and convenient experiences across physical and digital touchpoints. Customers today research online, purchase via apps, interact on social media, and expect after-sales support without friction. They want 24/7 responsiveness, mobile optimization, and flexible payment solutions. This is not just futuristic thinking, it's current reality in competitive markets around the world. Yet in the Caribbean, we continue to lag. Consider that a significant proportion of micro, small, and even medium-sized enterprises have no web presence. Fewer still offer e-commerce functionality. Digital storefronts remain the exception rather than the norm. Many businesses still rely on brick-and-mortar foot traffic and word of mouth referrals with little investment in data analytics, customer feedback loops, or CRM tools. We are not meeting our customers where they are, and that's a dangerous disconnect. The irony is that this challenge represents an enormous opportunity. By adopting a truly customer centric approach rooted in digital fluency, service design, and feedback responsiveness, Caribbean business can not only survive but thrive. Innovation need not be expensive. It requires a clear vision and the courage to reimagine how we deliver value. We must ask, are our products designed for today's lifestyles? Are we available where our customers are searching? Can they find us, engage with us, and buy from us easily from anywhere? It is this kind of thinking that must anchor a regional business strategy going forward. Governments, business support organizations, and chambers of commerce all have a role to play in enabling this transformation. Policy incentives for digitization, SME training in e commerce adoption, and stronger public private collaboration on digital infrastructure are critical. We also need a cultural shift where customer experience becomes a key performance indicator and not an afterthought. This includes building the skill sets to manage digital tools, designing services around user journeys, and embracing feedback as a tool for continuous improvement. As we reimagine economic development across the Caribbean, let us remember this. The customer is not a passive recipient of goods and services, but a driver of business evolution. Ignore them, and businesses will stagnate. Engage them, and entire sectors can transform. The post pandemic world offers the Caribbean a blank canvas to redraw its economic blueprint. Let customer centricity be the compass that guides us. Let digital adoption be the path we walk. And let innovation, informed by real people need and want, be our collective legacy. In a region known for its warmth, creativity, and entrepreneurial spirit, there is no reason we should be on the sidelines of global commerce. It's time to recrown the customer and let that simple but profound act reignite our journey towards sustainable, inclusive growth.
Change. Insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox and Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox and Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Welcome to Market Watch, your roundup of the latest economic, financial, and business trends shaping the Caribbean. My name is Joseph Cox. We begin in Washington, where a new bill before the U.S. House of Representatives proposes a 5% excise tax on remittances sent abroad. While U.S. citizens would be exempt, the measure would apply to over 40 million non-citizens, including green card holders and temporary workers. This move could have major implications for remittance-dependent countries in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, President Trump is reportedly finalizing a memorandum to halt remittances from undocumented immigrants, signaling a potentially seismic shift in cross-border financial flows. Turning to the region, the IMF has projected that St. Kitts and Nevis will grow by 2% in 2025, buoyed by tourism and upcoming energy projects. But the Twin Island Federation still faces fiscal headwinds, with declining citizenship by investment revenues pushing public debt projections above 70% of GDP by the end of the decade. In Jamaica, private pension assets reached a record high of $811 billion at the end of 2024, marking 14 consecutive years of growth. However, coverage remains modest at 11.6% as employment outpaces pension participation. Barbados is reforming student financing. The Student Revolving Loan Fund will now become a deposit taking institution, a move aimed at widening access and competing directly with banks and credit unions. Loan ceilings have also increased sixfold from $20,000 to $125,000. Grenada has joined the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, known as CAF, with a $5 million subscription. The move positions the country to access new development financing instruments while deepening regional cooperation. And in Cayman, optimism remains high. While PwC US has laid off 3,000 workers due to softening demand, PwC Cayman reports continued growth across all service lines, a sharp contrast that underscores diverging regional market conditions. In the capital markets, Tropical Battery Company has launched a $1.7 billion additional public offering to reduce debt and fund growth. The raise could exceed $2 billion and pave the way for a listing on the main market of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Grace Kennedy Limited posted strong first quarter results with revenues of 44.2 billion Jamaican dollars and net profits up 3% year on year. A $516 million dividend has been declared. GK Foods and Financial Services performed well, while remittance revenues in Guyana and Trinidad softened. Kingston Wharves also posted solid growth. Revenue climbed to $2.8 billion, up 10% over the previous year. Transshipment activity drove gains in terminal operations, though profits dipped in logistics due to cost reallocation and slower cargo flows. In social protection news, Jamaica's National Insurance Scheme pensioners will receive increased benefits starting April 1 thanks to a 17% rise in the National Insurance Fund, now totaling $227 billion. Weekly pensions are up by as much as $420, with funeral grants rising to $160,000 and new maternity benefits set at $16,000 for domestic workers from June 1. The move signals strengthened support for vulnerable groups and improved fiscal space. And in a major labor market move, Jamaica's cabinet has approved a national unemployment insurance benefit for NIS contributing workers, a first for the country and a direct response to the lessons of COVID-19. Finally, artificial intelligence continues to gain traction. A PwC report says AI could significantly boost growth in the Caribbean, especially in financial services, if governments and firms make the right investments in talent and regulations. In the meantime, as we move to the regional currencies, they remain largely stable this week, with the Bahamian dollar held its 1-to-1 peg to the US dollar, while Barbados and Belize traded at just over 2-to-1. Guyana's exchange rate remains the region's widest at 218 to 1 US dollar, followed by Jamaica at $159.16. The OECS dollar stood firm at $2.71 and Trinidad and Tobago TT dollar exchanged at $6.77. Energy prices saw mixed trends, with the West Texas Intermediate crude rose to $62.49 US dollars per barrel, whereas Brent climbed to $65.29 and the OPEC basket reached $66.02, all modest gains. Natural gas, however, dipped to $3.33 US, reflecting market uncertainty and shifting global demand forecasts. Caribbean stock markets mostly closed higher. The Jamaica Main Index rose by 0.4%, Trinidad Oil TNT Index gained 0.68%, and Bermuda's BSX advanced 0.5%. The ECSC, however, fell by 0.91%. Top gainers included 138 Student Living, up 13.2%, and Scotia's TNT, up 5.4%, while Margaritaville, Turks, and Supreme Ventures posted notable losses. Now that's it for this edition of Market Watch. I'm Joseph Cox. Stay tuned. Global Pulse is coming up next on Caribbean Business Review.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Global Pulse, your fast track roundup of this week's top economic developments from around the world. I am Sherian Farquharson. We begin in the United Kingdom, where employer confidence has dropped to its lowest level outside of the pandemic, with a net employment balance of just +8. 1 in 4 employers plans layoffs, citing rising employment costs and regulatory uncertainty. Retail and education are among the hardest hit. Meanwhile, the job market continues to suffer. Payrolls fell by 47,000 in March and are estimated to have declined further in April. Unemployment now stands at 4.5%, while wage growth is slowing, raising concerns at the Bank of England. To the US trade news. China's share of US trade has plummeted to just 7.65%, its lowest in 22 years amid escalating tariffs. However, tensions eased this week after the US and China agreed to a 90-day pause on most tariffs. The US rolled back rates from 145% to 30%, while China reduced duties on American goods to 10%. In a related development, China lifted its ban on Boeing aircraft deliveries. That, along with a $96 billion deal with Qatar Airways, is seen as a major win for the US aerospace giant. In the corporate sector, Uber reported its slowest ride-hailing revenue growth since the pandemic, up just 14%. But strong international demand and growth in delivery and robotaxi services helped offset US softness. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs has been fined $1.4 million for failing to report billions of trades accurately due to coding errors. Also in Washington, the US has slashed tariffs on small parcels from China and Hong Kong from 120% to 54%, just after the broader tariff pause was announced. A planned $200 fee per shipment was cancelled, although a $100 flat fee remains in place for goods arriving after May 2. In the auto world, Nissan plans to cut another 10,000 jobs globally, bringing its total layoffs to 20,000, amid sluggish sales in China and the US. Meanwhile, corporate departures from Delaware are gaining steam, with companies like Tesla and Trump Media moving to states with differing governance laws. Global debt has hit a record US $324 trillion in Q1, led by surges in China, France, and Germany. In Asia, Singapore's April exports jumped 12.4% year-on-year, driven by electronics and early tariff front-loading. However, shipments to Malaysia and China declined. In response to US tariffs on foreign films, New Zealand has boosted its movie rebate fund by NZ $577 million to attract international productions. Eligible projects can now claim up to 20% back on high-budget films and TV series. Finally, global stock markets saw broad-based gains at the week's end, driven by investor optimism across major economies. In the United States, the Dow Jones Industrial Average surged by 331 points, closing at 42,654.74 points, a 0.78% increase. The S&P 500 climbed 41.45 points to 5,958.38, up 0.70%, while the Nasdaq gained 97.8 points, ending at 19,211.10 points, a 0.52% rise. Over in Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 advanced by 47.66 points to 8,681.41 points, and Germany's DAX added 27.64 points, closing at 23,723.23. France's CAC 40 saw more modest growth, ticking up by 19.44 points to 7,872.91 points. In Asia, the Taiwan Stock Exchange rose 113.44 points, finishing at 21,843.69, while Japan's Nikkei 225 was virtually flat, slipping just 1.79 points to 37,753.72 points. And that's your International Business Recap. I'm Sherian Farquharson, and you're watching Global Pulse on CBR, bringing clarity to complexity. Caribbean Business Review continues after this break.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox and Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox and Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Welcome back, folks. And we are now joined by Mala Dukaran, economist, Caribbean advisor, and whatever else you might call her, a good friend. Good. Hi, Mala. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us here on Caribbean Business Review. This is a conversation that was long overdue, and I'm pleased that we're kicking off this series with you as one of our very special guests. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I am honored that you chose me to kick off and to be your inaugural interviewee. I really appreciate that you thought of me and giving me this opportunity to have this chat with you. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, man, sure, no problem. But I mean, what we're really looking at today, Mala, we're looking at the change in dynamic in Trinidad and Tobago. On April 28th, I believe, yes, you had a general election, or they had a general election in which Kamla Prasad Biseso was returned as prime minister after, I call it a bit of a hiatus. Now, while that is all fine and wonderful, and I'm sure some are happy, some not so happy, but that's life. The key questions that I really want us to explore is that what are the strategic imperatives for Trinidad and Tobago as they go forward? Many promises were made on the campaign trail. Now, reality, I suspect, would have kicked in. What are the strategic imperatives from where you sit?
You know, I guess you can think about strategic imperatives from the economic standpoint, social standpoint. For me, it always boils down to social, right? Because what's the point of having, for example, positive economic growth, which, you know, we do have to a certain extent in Trinidad. It really boils down to how are people affected and whether their lives are improving. And I want to say to you, Joe, that in the past, you know, I would say since around 2009, 2008, we have seen secular decline in socioeconomic performance in Trinidad and Tobago. When you look at our human development indicators, when you look at, for example, the level of crime, homicide rates in particular, from a social standpoint, Trinidad and Tobago is in decline and has been in decline since I would say around 2008 or 9. And so is it a strategic initiative or imperative that we want to discuss? Or is it just more so how do you stem this secular decline that we've been seeing? I actually think the problem in Trinidad and Tobago, but beyond Trinidad and Tobago in the wider Caribbean is one of institutional quality and governance. And when you look at the only country that I would say has achieved any kind of socioeconomic progress in the last 10 years in the Caribbean and beyond 10 years even, it's Jamaica, right? And I know that there are Jamaicans who will argue with me, but it's undeniable. When you look at the data, it's undeniable. And how did Jamaica achieve this? Jamaica strengthened its institutions and its governance. And that is fundamental to how Jamaica achieved this progress. One of the key things you would have seen is, and it was legislated only earlier this year, for example, that you have a fiscal commission and an economic commission. These are institutions that have been introduced that sort of oversee from a governance perspective the fiscal affairs of Jamaica and the a sort of a oversight for economic performance. And that's institutional strengthening. The fact that the central bank was, from a legislative perspective, given independence from the Ministry of Finance, and that legislation was passed a few years ago. These are the kinds of things that I think have yielded the progress Jamaica has seen. And so to answer you in a nutshell, I would say that the strategic imperative for Trinidad and Tobago and for any country that wants to see progress for its people, long-term socioeconomic progress, look at Jamaica and look at the kinds of reform initiatives that Jamaica has implemented since, say, 2011, 2012. It's not anything abstract that I'm talking about. It's not anything, fluffy that I'm talking about. It's all well documented and well articulated what Jamaica's agenda has been since 2011, 2012 under that IMF program that then morphed into what is now, Jamaica's program, not an IMF program. That's what Trinidad and Tobago needs. We need institutional strengthening. We need better governance. And oversight. And I think overarching all of that is you need to have a plan. And that's what Jamaica had. Jamaica had a plan. Jamaica has a plan of where is it we want to go? What is it we want to achieve? And then we have a process in place to get there.
Yeah. Now, well, you see, part of the challenge that I perceive with this entire scenario is that one, I'm focusing on Trinidad in particular. I mean, Jamaica has made substantial gains. There's no question about that. But in Trinidad, what strikes me, one, is that, for example, you raise the issue, and quite correctly, about fiscal discipline and the fiscal oversight, fiscal responsibility. But what strikes me was that when I was listening, eavesdropping as it were, on the campaign, a couple of things hit me. One, promised salary increases for the public sector workers. Two, you're looking at possible reopening of Petrotrin. Three, you have all sorts of other challenges now in terms of foreign exchange, whether in terms of sourcing the foreign exchange. You have some strong limits, let me put it that way, that have been put on the foreign exchange system. But at the same time, there's a notion that I don't know how much longer you can avoid moving from a managed float into a more market-driven exchange rate. So in other words, with all of that in place, how much latitude is really there? And frankly speaking, will the fiscal responsibility that you reference, will that ever really come to fruition?
No, and also the new Prime Minister has announced a repeal of the property tax that took so many years to legislate and implement, as well as the Revenue Authority, which would, of course, brought the Board of Inland Revenue and the Customs under one umbrella. And she's announced that she will repeal this Revenue Authority. So, to your point, everything that they've articulated is diametrically opposed to fiscal responsibility. And one of the things that people talk about the foreign exchange problem, I've written widely about this, Joe, as you know, and I've talked about it in various fora. The thing about the foreign exchange problem is one, it is a manufactured problem. It doesn't have to be a problem, but the policymakers choose a policy approach that is, of course, inappropriate but also harmful. And I've discussed it in many of my writings and gone into lots of very excruciating detail of how I explain why I say this. So, but we don't have a lot of time to go into that. But it doesn't have to be this way. It is also not a managed float. It's actually been fixed for quite a few years, and so it's de facto peg is what we've had. And when the government spends more than it earns and runs a fiscal deficit, what it does is it puts pressure on the external accounts and creates an external deficit. And we've not had a balanced budget since about 2009, if my memory serves me correct. And so there is no, how should I say this? There is no culture in Trinidad and Tobago of fiscal discipline, nor was it ever on the agenda. Whereas in Jamaica, Jamaica came from a place of default in 2011, right, where the government basically didn't have enough money to pay salaries, just like
Right.
Barbados did, up until its default in 2018. And when you get to that point is when the IMF is invited in to help, and the IMF can then say, well, you have to get certain things in order to correct this problem, because there's no point in us lending you money and then you're back here in a few months or years, right? And these are policy measures, what the IMF brings, that we all know we need. The politicians know it. They all know. All the policymakers know what we should be doing. We know we shouldn't be writing checks that our account can't cash and buying the carnival costume on credit. We know we shouldn't be doing these things on a
Yes.
personal level. Therefore, they also know it on a national level. But do they implement them? No, because everybody wants to have their pet project financed when they are a minister, and everybody wants to spend money in a way that they think suits their agenda as well as their re-election agenda. So fiscal discipline is not something that I think is inherent in the political structures we have, nor is it supported by the electoral cycle. Whereas if you have a national strategy that then is supported by a fiscal strategy that is then legislated, and it's a long-term strategy that's sort of a 10, 15, 20-year strategy, then you can transcend the electoral cycle and you can transcend the whims and fancies of various ministers and ministries. And that's what Jamaica has done in coming up with this plan that then you have these independent commissions, fiscal commission, as well as the economic commission to oversee. That's what Jamaica has done. And I think that is the kind of approach any country, including my country, but maybe especially my country, that's the kind of approach we should have. And I would encourage people to have a look at that story. I mean, I talked about it and I've done an interview. I've done a few interviews on how Jamaica has turned itself around. Most recently, I was in the Pacific. I was in Vanuatu up to a couple weeks ago, and delivered an address there in late April. And I talked about Jamaica and the epoch in Jamaica and how Jamaica has improved its institutional quality and its governance, and it has. Jamaica now has the lowest unemployment it ever had, lowest poverty rate it ever had, more economic and fiscal and foreign exchange stability than it ever had. That didn't happen by accident, So these are tried and true, and these are tried and true approaches, yeah.
No, it doesn't, but it's a part of the challenge that I have, and I have it with Jamaica, I have it with Trinidad, Barbados, frankly speaking, the whole Caribbean, and that's data. I cannot get on a timely basis the kind of data that one would really require to make the kind of meaningful interventions that you know you would have to do or you would have to make. So, for example, you reference unemployment and poverty rates. I was looking around to see if I could pick up, get a feel for what the poverty rates were in Trinidad. I ran into a challenge, to be frank with you. Um, and so the
But that
story
poverty
goes.
statistic is a no, but that I want to agree with you, but I want to also disagree with
That's
you
fine.
too. And I'm glad we're friends and we can disagree respectfully. I love
After
it.
all,
No, you're right that we have data limitations. We don't have up-to-date poverty data in Trinidad and Tobago, nor for the rest of the Caribbean, except for Jamaica and the Dominican Republic.
right.
And I lamented this and wrote about it and did a podcast with the head of the World Bank for the Caribbean, who's based in Jamaica, Lilia. I'm not sure if you would have seen it. It's on my channels, but I think that part of the reason for that is that it's politically sensitive to measure poverty and publish it because no administration wants to take accountability for any rise in poverty under their watch, right? So that's why they just don't prioritize even measuring it, unfortunately. But the thing is, you cannot solve poverty without measuring it, right? So are they even serious about solving it? I doubt. But the other thing is, I think I want to disagree with you when you say we don't have enough data. Because in many instances, we do have data and we do have policy recommendations coming out of the data. I myself have personally made many, but also other policy recommendations based on the evidence that isn't acted upon by the policymakers. And I'll give you an example. So I sit on the board of the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI, which is also based in Jamaica.
Mhm.
And CAPRI produces a ton of evidence-based policy analysis and recommendations. And we have found that it takes, around 8 years or so
Yes,
on average
yes,
for our policy recommendations, which are substantiated in the evidence,
yes, yes.
to actually be translated into policy, be it legislative or otherwise. So we have the evidence that even when we give them the evidence and even when we have the data and we can demonstrate that we are making a policy recommendation based on the evidence, it still takes many, many years for the policy to respond to the data and the evidence. So, yes, we can do much better with the data, but even when we have the data, the policymakers are very slow to do what's needed.
No, well, I hear you on that, but the challenge that we're facing though is that it strikes me that when we're looking at some of the data, timeliness, availability of data is one aspect of it. Yes, sure, but the timeliness of the data is a whole nother story. And so, for example, um, I sometimes get more information about some of our islands right across the region through the Article 4, the IMF Article 4 consultation mechanism, rather than I get it through the respective statistical departments. You can get, yes, by and large, you can pick up some inflation data. Growth is always a little iffy. Right? And as you said, you have some issues which are politically sensitive. But you see, the issue with it, and I absolutely agree with you. You say 8 years, the policy lag or the lag between the recommendations and the actual policy is 8 years. I'd probably put it at 10. But the point is well taken. But what strikes me as we look, for example, at Trinidad and Tobago, just coming out of the elections, presumably in the honeymoon period, the new regime is in the honeymoon period, etc. But if you don't, if you have these sorts of constraints, and if there's an unwillingness or inability to take some of um, the harder decisions, and to really transform that economic trajectory, then what is the next step? Because to me, that is where where it comes down to. What is the next step? What is it that you do at a point in time when you're faced with reality? You said, for example, property taxes in Trinidad. I have a feeling that this is the end of it. I don't think any politician will ever go back there again, because my own reading of history would say that that was part of the challenge that Mr. Manning had when he was in power. um, no, just the most recent regime, they seem to have lost favor over the same thing. So, for example, so the point is simply this: are the policy options really and truly, as you look forward as to what's going on in Trinidad, are the policy options really disappearing and being really masked by pure political considerations rather than economic reality?
Well, politics always trumps economics. We know that until they fall flat on their face, and then they have to come to the evidence as to what they need to do from a policy perspective. But you just addressing your initial point around the availability get more information from an IMF Article 4 than you can from a CSO or central bank, and
Right.
that is absolutely true. And I've experienced that. But the fact that the IMF can get the data means that the data exists. The question is, why was the data not published by the local authorities? It was given to the IMF, they published it, but the fact that the local authorities didn't publish it is telling,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they need to get that act together. But with respect to your question around, the policy agenda, be it the property tax or otherwise, and now that this government is repealed, will they? And I mean, there is no vacuum in terms of the policies. What I think we need is to understand certain basic relationships. In
Mm-hmm.
the first place, if you continue borrowing and you continue spending more than you earn, at some point, you're not going to have enough. We know that based on debt sustainability threshold evidence, most countries in the Caribbean can tolerate up to about a 56% debt to GDP and after that, each additional dollar of debt actually causes your economy to shrink. It has a negative impact on
Quite.
GDP.
Yes. Yes.
So we know that we're well over that level in Trinidad and Tobago and indeed most other countries in the Caribbean. So we're already in the danger zone. And so
Mm-hmm.
we need to rein in our spending. Now, when you think about taxes, like the property tax or any tax, what is the whole reason why we tax? And I think most people don't really understand and make this relationship well understood in their own heads and in their conversations about tax. You have a tax or you tax your people in order to pay for the social contract. Now, maybe we need to think about what the social contract looks like, whether or not the state is fulfilling its role or is in breach of its social contract. And therefore, how can you continue to tax me when you cannot even keep me safe? Right? So I think that these are very fundamental, if not philosophical or ideological questions we need to be thinking about. But you have a state in Trinidad and Tobago that has failed miserably for, I would say, the better part of 15 years in providing a safe environment for its people, in providing an ease of doing business and an ease of, ease of doing business and ease of living,
Mm-hmm.
so that people can progress. We have seen the deterioration, as I mentioned in the start of this conversation, on social metrics across the board, insofar as they are even measuring them. And that is one of the reasons why the PNM lost the election and lost it by such a margin. So what what we have to think about going forward, and I guess we get back to the question as to that you asked me and why I'm here. What is the strategy, the economic strategy? I think in the first place, the government needs to think about where is it falling short in its social contract that it has with its people, and providing security is one of the fundamental components of a social contract, right? Otherwise, if you can't provide me security, then it might as well be the wild, wild west, which it basically is. And of course, this prime minister said on the campaign trail something to the effect of, be prepared with your weapons, basically, right? So, in other words, you've devolved the social contract to the people to look after themselves. And why are you taxing me? You know what I mean? So these are very important. It might sound philosophical and ideal, but these are very important issues to think about. And this government and successive governments in Trinidad have failed to protect people. And insofar as they can't protect people, then all other policy measures are pretty much moot, Joe, from my perspective. So that to me is the first thing they need to tackle. And then the second thing is fiscal discipline, but in the broader context of institutional strengthening and better governance, a la the Jamaica model, which we've seen work, and it worked for twice as many people in Jamaica as we have in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think I just want to end there. I think maybe, I encourage you in your other discussions with other interviewees,
Right.
talk about how Jamaica has made the kind of progress Jamaica has made in the last 10 years. You are the example we all need to be looking to, because otherwise it's been an experiment since we've gained independence 60 or so years ago, right? But we now have a model that has worked, and
Yeah.
Jamaica has demonstrated that consistently, and
No.
we need to listen.
Yeah. No, quite so, Mala. And I mean, as we wrap up this conversation here, I really just have to ask you some really pointed questions. Is Petrotrin really likely to be reopened after all of what transpired, and within the context of what's happening in the broader, what should I say, hydrocarbon markets?
I am no expert in on this topic, Joe, and I think that is a question better to be answered by the policymakers. But from what I understand, we need at least $1 billion in investment in that plant that has been shuttered for, I don't know, better part of 7 years or something like that. So it's not a matter of turning on like a blender. It's a massive piece of it's a plant. It's not even a
Yes.
piece of equipment. And so my understanding, as an economist, I'm not an expert in this. My understanding is you need to spend $1 billion
Wow.
to have that plant up and running in
Yeah.
any meaningful way, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer to that
Yeah.
question. If that is going to be their policy priority, where they're going to get the $1 billion, are they going to privatize it? I really can't say. I
Okay.
really don't know.
No, fair enough. And of course, the absolute last question is in terms of the exchange rate. Your black market rate in Trinidad is anywhere between 12, and some might push it up to as high as 15. No, no, I shouldn't say 12, in fairness.
No, no, no. It's
9 to
between
12. 9 to 12. You can't get 9. That I know for a fact. But what do you think?
my understanding. It's between 8 and 10,
Well, 9 is a happy medium, but
and
all
it's
right.
been stable. The thing is, it's been stable between 8 and 10, and that's actually a good indicator
Yeah, but
that it
Mala,
is a legitimate.
Yeah, but Mala, the reality of life is that the businessmen not getting the currency, they're buying, for example, stocks in Jamaica, selling them short to try and get the foreign exchange, which then puts pressure on the Jamaican foreign exchange market. So I'm not so sure what's going on there. But all right.
I would suggest that the Jamaican policymakers need to think about that in their own policy agenda. But clearly, the policymakers in Trinidad and Tobago seem to be hell bent on their inappropriate, if not harmful, policy agenda as it relates to foreign exchange management.
All right.
Jamaica needs to wet its house.
Well, I leave it to the government of Jamaica to treat with those things. But thank you very much, Marla Dukaran, for being our guest here on Caribbean Business Review. Marlo, always a pleasure, my friend. All the best to you.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks for
blessings.
having me,
All
Joe.
right, sure. Bye
Blessings
bye.
to you too. Bye.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox and Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox and Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Welcome back to Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox, and today we are having a conversation about our labor market and the skills regime within the Caribbean. Because part of the dynamic that we have to recognize is that our region, by and large, is suffering from a very strange affliction. It's known as decline in population. But within that context, we also have significant labor market rigidities, labor market dysfunctions. We have a mismatch of skills. We have all sorts of challenges that in fact, became exacerbated during the recent pandemic. Now, to look at that and to discuss these issues, I'm pleased to be joined today by Marjorie Straw, who is a development consultant and a program specialist. And Marjorie will be able to walk us through, I would hope, in our discussions, some of the real solutions, some of the issues, obviously, and some of the solutions that we really must confront if we are to treat with it. Now, Marjorie, as I welcome you to CBR, the first issue really would be, given the informality, and of course, we all know about it, it's 40 to 60% right across the Caribbean. We noticed that, for example, government of Jamaica recently announced that they are launching an unemployment insurance regime, and they're also launching a skills bank. To my certain knowledge, Trinidad has had sorry, unemployment insurance for some years. Question really being, is this necessary and sufficient to treat with the labor market dysfunction that we face right across this region?
Right. Thank you, Jose, and thanks for having me on your program. It's not going to be an easy fix. When you talk about human capital development, it's not an overnight process. Generally, and I know that we're tired of using Singapore as an example, but what we find is countries with long-term planning with respect to human capital do see the results in a more sustainable manner over time.
Mhm.
And what we have to do better in the region is to make that investment regardless of what administration is in power. And so let me start with the skills bank. It's good to have a database of skills. It's good to understand what our repository of skills are in the region.
Right.
But the next step is to be able to match those skills, and for persons who, or not even persons who, but to ensure that the market can receive those skills
Indeed,
or
indeed,
employ those skills.
indeed.
And I don't think that's true.
Mm.
I don't think that our market are ready for the emerging skills that are required. I suspect that many of the skills that would be captured may not fall in that category of emerging skills.
Mm. So basically, what you're looking at then, Marjorie, is that you're quickly transitioning into something that most people will argue about, and will be the need for upskilling and reskilling across our labor force. But the honest truth of it, and I don't know if you agree with me, but the honest truth of it seems to be that across the region, we spend very little in terms of training. It seems between that and marketing seems to be almost an afterthought, a luxury that most companies think they can't afford. No, am I on the right track, or this is, what's
I
the
mean,
perspective?
I think it's two things, Joseph. One, we need everybody, regardless of their age, to know that we're in a time where technology is disrupting constant, and that continuous learning just has to be part of our DNA, where we're constantly motivated to upskill ourselves. But what I would say is, I have seen that where governments take deliberate effort to upskill a workforce, that there are tangible results. Take, for example, the work we did with the global services sector.
Mhm,
We upskilled over 3,000 persons, resulting in over 2,000 persons graduating and filling a necessary gap
right.
for that sector. So if you notice that what we're talking about is how to be intentional
Mhm,
about our workforce development. The unemployment insurance is noble, and I'm sure for those in the formal sector will welcome it. But we cannot ignore that we have underskilled persons or persons who could benefit from upskill largely in the informal
mhm.
sector.
But Marjorie, isn't the problem even deeper than that? Because I mean, fine. I take the point in terms of the upskilling and the reskilling. That goes without saying in a changing world in which we live, clearly. That that's something we have to do. But isn't part of the challenge, and this is right across the Caribbean, that even when you start the structured training programs, and you reference the informal sector, which is 40 to 60% of all of in most countries of the GDP, or the size of the country, basically, the economy of the country. Isn't the challenge that when you start the program, people go in and, for example, the program is, I don't know, a year, 2 years. And after 4 months, they decide that they have learned enough and come out. Isn't the problem, Marjorie, I would put to you, isn't the problem also a lack of certification? So therefore, that also reinforces the labor market rigidity. In other words, it stops people from moving seamlessly across jobs and across industries.
Yeah, yes, you're right. I agree with you, because we have to move away from this push for degrees to pushing certification, but also being more agile in how we offer certification.
Mhm,
You can go on and do free courses, as you know, and at a self-paced manner and get your certificate. We need industry certification, and this is where the sector skills councils can play a very strong role,
mhm,
because they understand what the industry requires. They can develop the curricula, thereby making the training very, very relevant to their needs. That industry certificate is, as the name suggests, transferable across industries. And then, secondly, you layer that with a, say, an NCT vet certificate, which is usually recognized
Right.
regionally, excuse me.
Hmm. No, I get your point, but you see, at the end of the day, we are also faced with an underpopulation. I saw something. Let me just reference the data I saw for Jamaica. That by 2050, we'll actually probably be down, of the population will be down significantly, which obviously has implications for the labor force. Even though the youth population is roughly, when you look at it, it's probably 60% of the total, right? Or I shouldn't say youth, but the persons under 40, let me put it that way, are roughly 60% of your population. No, when you look at that, you juxtapose that between current rigidities, you juxtapose that with the high levels of informality, the, I call it impatience or short termism, which is applied to training and upskilling services generally. Um, what's the solution? How do we really navigate this as we go forward? Because it strikes me that, boy, no matter how hard you're trying, you have, you're really walking a tightrope, as it were, because in a lot of cases you also have, and Jamaica is certainly not the case or the example in this case, but you do have other countries within this region where the actual skill levels are incredibly low. How do you navigate this?
I would suggest a multi-pronged approach
Sure.
from the educational system. Skills need to be taught from, say, primary school levels all the way to secondary, graduate and tertiary. Secondly, strong apprenticeship programs where persons get on-the-job training and their certificates, thereby upskilling as they're learning and working, helps to fill that gap, that unemployment gap, because a student or a person can work their way through. For the older population, I would suggest that we start to get creative and innovative, because a lot of these retired persons still have skills that are very relevant and very much needed.
Absolutely.
And we have to face the fact that we have an aging population, as you said.
Mhm.
And so as we build the pipeline of stronger skilled persons, younger persons, still find ways to leverage these older retired persons. The short-term thinking, Joseph, that's a life skill. That's a work life ethic. Yeah. And so now what I see is how we have to build in life skills into training,
Mhm.
which we never used to have to do in such a deliberate way.
So when you say building life skills into training, give me an example of what you mean.
Managing patients. So yes, you do a certificate program. Yes, you want to work and earn the money right away, right away. But what about recognizing that you might have to upskill a bit better before you get that ideal pay grade, or learning how to navigate the work environment so you can understand what the opportunities are
Mhm.
and how to leverage that. Many persons come in and they're interviewed and they don't ask HR, what's my growth potential in the next year or two? Or in the case of the BPO, it was not unusual to hear that someone left a job because they could get $2 more.
Mm.
You see, so balancing.
No, I hear you, know, but you know, and I don't want to put you on a spot, but it really begs the question. As we look to the future of work, are jobs, for example, like at the levels at which the Caribbean in Maine participates, for example, in the BPO sector, are those sustainable? Because it seems to me that with the advent of artificial intelligence, that a lot of those processes can be automated or mechanized, call it whatever way you wish. And therefore, it seems to me that we probably should be targeting other types of industries over the medium to long term. I'm not saying that we'll shut down, the thing tomorrow morning, but I'm just looking medium and longer term. Shouldn't we really be looking beyond?
Diversification is always recommended, in sectors. But I think that the BPO or the global services sectors
Mhm.
still has a lot of potential. What we have to recognize is that as countries in the region, we are not moving as fast as the technology is requiring. And so, whilst we take 2 years to develop standards and curricula that becomes
Yeah,
obsolete and irrelevant,
yeah,
we need in our educational systems one basic math and English, cognitive learning, critical
yeah,
learning. And I'm talking from kindergarten, basic schools. And I don't want anyone in the region to tell me that that's not possible when I see examples from Japan and China where they're teaching 2-year-olds, right? So we need to shift our mindset
yeah,
in the region. That's the first thing. Secondly, all our systems are running the risk of becoming archaic. And I stand by it,
yeah,
right? And so until we actually say that we're going to try pilot it, why aren't we looking at, say, updating a curriculum every 6 to 12 months? Joseph,
yeah,
it seems obvious,
yeah.
but we lack that will, or we don't understand the mechanisms on how to do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, Marjorie, we have probably 30 seconds left in this thing. So I will ask you to give me, if you could give our leadership across this region one fundamental suggestion that you think would be transformative as we deal with the labor market issues, the population issues going forward, what would that be?
That's not an easy one,
No, I know it's
Josie.
not an easy one, but you see, your response or no response at this point should really highlight the challenges that the politicians and policymakers face when confronting this issue. It is a thorny issue. It has political overtones in some respects, and the fact of life is that, as you quite rightly point out, you have different population segments. You're talking about the elderly. In some countries across the region, retirement is as young as 50, which is the
Yeah,
most
yeah.
ridiculous thing I have ever heard. And at the
Well,
other extreme, you have those going up now to 67. And I heard something on the radio the other day, which I really had to laugh. The hosts were doing a poll about what people considered elderly. And they said when they reach 31.
oh my God.
So at that point in time, I say, we have a lot of work to do. But
We have a lot to work.
Yes, Marjorie Straw, we have to end it here for today. I
No,
thank
but
you
but
very
what I
much. Yes.
would say, Joseph, just 1 minute. If I had to say one thing, take bold moves towards education.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's what I would
I,
say.
I think that that's a fair comment. Fair comment. So Marjorie Straw, development consultant and project strategist, I thank you very much for your participation today on the Caribbean Business Review. And I do wish you will be a frequent visitor to this program as we continue to cogitate on the issues that confronts this region. So thank you very much, Marjorie.
Thank you, Joseph. Looking forward to it.
All right.
Take care.
Good. Bye bye. Well, that's how we have to bring our program to a close this week as we extend our profound thanks to Marla Dukaran and Marjorie Straw for their interventions in the program offering. We would also like to entreat you, our audience, to subscribe and follow us on social media as we continue to strive to give you even a better product. We look forward to your comments, positive or negative, as we seek to strengthen our offering even further. As you recognize by now, this program is data driven, and that's what we are committed to be. So until next week, on behalf of my internet challenged co-host, we wish to extend to you our thanks again for your attention, and we do hope that you will join us again next week, same time, as we discuss more on CBR.